All right, so next up we've got Chris Coyier. So Chris is a web designer and developer, has been for a number of years, was the creator of CSS Tricks. There's a CSS Tricks fan over there. And the co-founder of CodePen, and has a pretty amazing podcast as well. And Chris is going to come and talk about full stack developers. Give him a big round of applause, please.
All right, we're going to talk about front-end development because that's all I know about. So if you absolutely don't care about that, then what, see a vendor or something. But with a changing landscape of front-end development, I think it's absolutely fascinating right now, and it's morphed to kind of a full-stack world. Like it or not, too bad. What is a front-end developer? Cliche way to start a talk, whatever. We're going to do it anyway. It's a job, and I think that's crucial because it's how you make money in the world. Like, people care about that pretty deeply. When it has to do with how you make money in the world, you care like a whole bunch. So there's like an earthquake underneath front-end development. It's at best uncomfortable, So that's what's happening a little bit. But if you're a front-end developer, what is it? Well, the front-end part is browsers and assistive technology. Like, that's the front-end part of front-end. Probably not terribly surprising to people. You're a browser nerd if you're a front-end developer. There's a whole landscape of browsers. It's fascinating and hard, and they call it an infinite unknown canvas that makes being a front-end developer kind of a pain in the ass sometimes. But you're a browser assistive tech person. That's the job. That's the front-end part. It's not that other roles don't have the browser open too. They do, but whatever. And the browsers don't exist all by themselves. They run on devices. They run on your laptops and phones and refrigerators and whatever else crap these days. This conference is all about it, I'm sure. So, and there's a whole landscape of those too. Extra pain in the ass. Okay, still should be a highly paid job at this point. And then of course they're not alone either. It's about the people, and that's the most important thing. It's about the people who use browsers on devices. That's what makes you a front-end developer, and that hasn't changed that much. I mean, the devices thing is relatively new, but not really at this point. Front-end developer is about people who use browsers on devices, and you're taking care of that situation. So because you're a browser person, you need to know the languages that run in those browsers, for the most part, which are the classics of front-end development. There's all kinds of tooling around those languages, but those change and they come and go, and those languages tend to not come and go. They evolve too, but a little bit more slowly, and they matter, and you need to know them because that's what browsers speak, and you're a browser nerd. So, like, it's going to come up at work. Like, these languages, somebody's got to know them because it's going to matter to some degree. So it's interesting that not all developers know all of those languages equally well, and that's fine. I mean, the world is a diverse place in that way too. I know plenty of front-end developers who are just like HTML and CSS people, very talented at that, and happily, gainfully employed and stuff. Maybe like less jobs in that lately, for better or worse. Certainly a lot more jobs and focus around the JavaScript ecosystem and stuff. This is an essay I wrote earlier this year about that. Interesting thing that's happening. This talk isn't necessarily about that, but we're kind of, just because the world is a lot more JavaScript focused lately, are going to talk about that more, because that's, if we're talking about this earthquake under the feet of front-end developers, that's what's happening. So let's talk about that. I think the most significantly interesting part of all this is that a lot of stuff that used to be like under the purview of back-end developers has kind of picked up and walked over to be front-end developer land and stopped there, which is hence the full stack thing. Let's talk about that. One of the most interesting things to me, this is kind of shaken out already, is that we build UIs with components now. That's just already been decided for us in a way. Interesting. In a way that kind of wasn't the case when apps were more server-side rendered and stuff, just because they didn't go there. So another thing that's probably obvious to most of you in here, if you're in the front-end development world, like React is huge, but it's really huge? All of the front-end frameworks together. I mean, front-ends are just largely just built from the big players of JavaScript frameworks these days. They like to fight with each other, argue about the merits of what they're doing and all that, and the people that use them like to bicker about things, for better or worse. But there's one thing they all weirdly just agree on, is that all front end is components now. Even the native web technology, web components, is components. Okay. Cool. So, and there's a good reason for that, and it's just the things that we're building are starting to get more complicated, and it feels good to chunk together things in responsibility. Like, I want to write semantic HTML. I like clean, good CSS and intelligent, well-written JavaScript, but I want to chunk it together because it's just how my team talks and how they think and how they want to build things. It just makes sense to build websites out of like isolated responsibility chunks. Because website, sure. Group all that stuff together and chunk it. It's just a way to work because websites tend to be just like nested chunks of stuff like that. That kind of stuff has shaken out already to be the way that we build UIs now, or not every website in the world, but a lot of them. We're talking about the future, where things are going. Let's look at this through the lens of CodePen, an app that I work on. Like, what here makes sense to be a component? Well, let's zoom in pretty damn far. That little heart icon down there, I hope you can see. It's just a tiny little icon. Of course, that makes sense in the UI world to build that with a little piece of inline SVG. And sure enough, in the DOM, that ends up as inline SVG. But in our in our kind of code base, it expresses itself as a component of our own creation called an SVG icon component. And it's just an abstraction of the nice like semantic HTML chunk and all the accessibility stuff and sizing stuff and like SVG best practices. That's how it ends up in the DOM, but the developer ergonomics of it is just like, it's an SVG icon. And then if things change or we need to do intelligent things, we change the component and it sprinkles its way throughout the whole app. It's a nice way for us to work. Now, what else is a component? Well, you don't have to zoom out very far to see more kind of intelligent chunking of responsibility. Like just that icon next to a number, that's another component because it has a totally different little chunk of responsibility. It has a number, so there's like data handling responsibility. It has a tiny little CSS grid to lay out the icon next to the number. And it has like a click handler on it because if you click it, that data needs to change and go back to the database. It's a different chunk of responsibility. And when you're building UIs, it makes sense to combine them like that, or at least it does for us on our team. Componentry. You zoom out. That's a nice little component for us. The preview is a nice little component. The header is a nice little component. Those get grouped together in an item or a card component, which I'm sure everybody in this room has built a card of some kind. It's just nice. It just matches how our team works and talks to each other and thinks about the UI that we're building together. We can zoom out a little further and be like, the grid is a component. Literally a CSS grid lays out that component that we built, but it also has pagination responsibility built into it. So it's like a chunk of responsibility that makes sense in how we're building this UI. So componentry, everybody agrees that's how we build UIs now. Front-end developers are like, this is good for us. Designers are like, way to catch up. That's how we've been thinking forever about things. And other developers are like, yeah, whatever, components make sense, got it. So let's look at that chunk again there. What else is a component here? Well, we might as well just componentize the whole damn thing, right? There's a title component, buttons, a tab component. We might as well zoom out, just build the whole thing out of components. Sure, that makes the whole page a component at that point. And then what you've kind of done is you've made the kind of the URL a component at that level. You said at that URL, this is what I want to render, all this particular stuff. And that's become like a front-end concern. If it's the front-end developers that are choosing how to chunk all that responsibility, then you're all the way up to the URL level, then you've kind of become the architect of the entire site then. Like front-end developers, oh, do we just do it all now? Is that cool? Is there a raise? I don't know. So yeah, like it just adds to the kind of the haystack of responsibilities that we already had as front-end developers. We'll look at that more in a minute. Well, if we look at this, let's kind of keep looking at that. I guess there's clearly a bunch of data that needs to happen, right? There's a bunch of avatars and titles and usernames and stuff on there. I think most of us have the intuition that that's data and it lives in a database. And if you want to show it on a website, you query the database and ask for it and present it on the web page. Yes, great. As a front-end developer, traditional would be like, I got this. I'm going to mock up this page. I'm going to get it perfectly ready for all kinds of scenarios, and I'm going to think about accessibility and performance, and I'm going to lay this thing out according to the design specs and get this thing all ready. And then a back-end developer says, cool, thanks. I'm going to fill that up with the data that's obviously necessary to make this page. That's becoming less and less true. With stuff like GraphQL, I'm sure there's lots of great GraphQL stuff. In fact, I know there is at this conference. I'd love to sit around and talk about the merits of GraphQL, but what's interesting here is that it's kind of like easy-ish to use, and it's It's like a shopping list of data that you need to fill up this area with data. And what's significant about it in this talk is that it's like moving that back-end responsibility, picking it up and giving it to front-end developers. Like, hey, front-end developers, you want some data for your mockups? Just fill out this shopping list and it will arrive, you know? And there's a little bit more to know, but it's that shifting of responsibility that's interesting to me. It's saying front-end developers, go get your own data. Fascinating to me. And it's not just always the getting of data and the changing of data and state management and that type of thing, but there's also the changing of data and putting it back into a database, which has long been scary to me and always been a purview of backend developers. Like, I don't know, I'm gonna click something and something's gonna change on the website and it needs to go back to the database. That's a data mutation, and that happens in GraphQL and isn't terribly harder or more difficult than querying for the data to begin with. So now all of a sudden as a front-end developer, I'm in charge of getting my own data, changing my own data, putting the data back where it needs to go. Jesus. Okay, and it's starting to express itself in like, okay, we're chunking components together. Well, Vue is notable for having single file components. The template and the scripts and the styles are all together in one file, and Angular has folders of components. In this case, we're using React and Webpack and GraphQL and CSS modules, and we're chunking all the files together. I mean, we separate the files in this particular case, but they're combined into a folder. This is a chunk of responsibility that is all together. Kind of just interesting. It's a nice way to build and think about and work with your team on UIs. I mentioned CSS modules briefly. CSS modules is like the lightest step you can take into CSS and JavaScript. You know, a lot of people have opinions about that, but I think it's pretty interesting. I'm going to write some CSS that is intentionally scoped to just this small piece of UI that I'm mentally dealing with right now. And I can't write CSS in there that's going to kick over a bar stool in another bar, as the joke goes. It's scoped to deal with just that. Fascinating, and it's not only kind of a good idea, but it makes people that step into the project feel safe in there and feel productive, that I can alter the styling in this little place and not have to worry about it elsewhere. And there's just all kinds of other interesting advantages to it. So we talked about component-driven design and how front-end developers are doing that and thinking about that, which spreads all the way to site-level architecture and dealing with URLs and getting data from backends and changing data and dealing with state management. All new stuff that is picked up and landed at front-end developers' doorstep. Fascinating. But it doesn't mean that, like, because you have to do all that work now, that the world, being a front-end developer, you have to do any less than you did before. There's still just like, I don't know, doing the design, you know, like making sure that this design that you've been handed is pulled off efficiently and nicely on the world's hardest canvas to design for, because it's infinite and unknown and weird and exists on a million devices in different browsers. It's your job to think systemically about that design and implement it in a way that, you know, perhaps is literally using a design system. That's so big these days. And you're dealing with the accessibility because you're the front lines of accessibility. You know, browsers and assistive tech is where accessibility happens. That's on you, front-end developers. Most of performance is focused on front-end development. You know, 80% or something is how things load on the page. And especially when you factor in perceived performance, that's a front-end dev thing. Testing across that landscape and really caring about the people who use those browsers on those devices experience your website. That's you and that's your job. That's huge already, plus all the new stuff, you know? It's just fascinating how wide the spectrum has gotten. So the haystack of crap for front-end developers, bigger, 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 bigger. It's interesting also the way we talk about this, just the way that, you know, just hallway conversations about, hey, what's your website like? It changes too. Here's a spectrum of skills from front end to back, just stuff that's traditionally back end, stuff that's front end. You know, there's a lot of websites out there, an old stack, still a very popular stack. Linux, Apache, MySQL.PHP, the LAMP stack. When we say that, we're talking about stuff that's on the back end. And if I'm a front end developer, I'm just like, cool, I'm over here. Apparently, I'm not a part of this stack that you're going to talk about this website with. We're separate. And this changes over time. Along comes the mean stack. It's moved to the right a little bit. We're not talking about the operating system anymore. It's probably Linux. Who cares? You know, like, I don't know. Doesn't matter. Move to the right. Now we're talking about, we're even including JavaScript frameworks in this acronym. And it's starting to overlap a little bit more with me as a front-end developer. Like, thanks for including me in your little stack. Cool. Serverless tech, I'm hot on. I love it. It's so cool. It involves me more and more. Like I think its existence makes me more powerful as a front-end developer. It's server-side, but it's probably Node, which is in my purview as a JavaScript developer, meaning cool, I can overlap with that at least a little bit. So if I'm a JavaScript-focused front-end developer, I overlap with that more and more. And then we got, Sean Wang here giving a talk yesterday about Star. Like that's a stack. You're saying Star is a way to build a website. Star is design systems, TypeScript, Apollo, GraphQL, React. Now we're way to the right. The way we're talking about what the stack that builds that website totally overlaps with front-end development and even goes off the chart because it's talking about design stuff. So I'm like, cool. So apparently the way we talk about websites now is all me. Me. Thanks, people that talk about websites. Cool. So if we're talking about the spectrum here, in my skill set, I don't care about those things. That's not me. I'm just going to slice those off of the world. I don't deal with databases either, or I do, but I'm dealing with them through APIs or through a headless CMS or some static site generating or something. So I'm not dealing with that crap. So here's the spectrum of skills that's left for me. I'll include server-side languages there because thanks serverless, maybe my JavaScript skills have stretched into Node a little bit, so I'm not afraid of that world so much. These things in the middle, if I'm a JavaScript-focused front-end developer, are my bread and butter there, but of course I'm a front-end developer, so I'm speaking all the languages of browsers. So starting to feel like Rainbow Man here. I got all that rainbow is me. And then you add to that just the extra skills, like writing good emails and stuff, but also I know Git and I can do a little design and I know about testing and process and performance and accessibility and just other tangential stuff that have to do with building websites. If I know those things too and I'm Rainbow Man, I'm full stack. No shit I am, Yeah, you're full stack, not me. I'm terrible at stuff. I just do talks. But that haystack is so big now. We talk about all the new stuff, all the old stuff, all the tangential stuff, hell of a haystack. You're probably not going to be super duper amazingly good at every single thing we just talked about there. Probably very few people in this room. I'm certainly not great at all that stuff. So it's should I specialize? Well, you don't have much of a choice. You're just gonna specialize. You're just gonna be better at some of that stuff than other stuff. And fine, cool, great, if you're alone, that's an interesting challenge, but a lot of us are just on teams and work with other people, and the idea is maybe that stuff can be paired together. So one of the things that's kind of interesting here, when we're cool, we're full stack now, there's gaps in that full stack thing, and a lot of times full stack, just at the moment in the industry, kind of hires a little heavier on the back-end side. So you're full stack, but maybe what falls away a little more commonly is that HTML, CSS stuff, which leads to the horse. It's the horse problem, sure, you're full stack. Hey, at least it's a horse, at least it can move, kinda. But sometimes, that happens to be where the gap is. I think the horse is freaking hilarious, but I'm not the horse. I have little tiny back-end skills because I'm fascinated by serverless and I've just been around long enough to have some skills across the board. But my skills and interests are way more front-end focused. So I'm like the dragon, a little more dragony. There's me. And I'm kind of hoping that I'm on a team where we can complement each other. That ideally somebody has paired me up with a horse and I can be the dragon and we'll just be a cool horse dragon. That's super ideal. That would be great for me. And hopefully somebody can come in and be the wing, because that's cloud, I guess. Let's call the wing cloud. So nice, it's just there's all kinds of possibility and stuff. Lots of stuff has changed. Getting a job is weirder. The landscape is weirder. I'm sure a lot of people have thoughts about this. Good news, we're going to do a Q&A and just talk about it all together right after this. So that's kind of nice. So if your mind is reeling with thoughts, hang out with me. But what hasn't changed is that we're all still browser people. We all deal with the users who use browsers, which is this infinite unknown canvas of, I should say terribleness, but it's pretty great. But it's hard to work in browsers. There's all kinds of crap to think about. Who are shepherds of UX and shepherds of performance and accessibility. All this stuff hasn't changed. So let's just do right by those people who use browsers. let's just do right by them. Thanks everybody for listening.